Everyone has more to them than meets the eye. There are portions that we wish didn't exist, and pieces that we keep hidden inside. Carl Jung was a prominent psychologist of the 20th century. He felt that everyone had a shadow side that they had suppressed since childhood. This shadow is frequently linked to our unpleasant feelings, but we can only truly know ourselves if we embrace, rather than ignore, our shadow side. We'll go over all you need to know about Carl Jung and the shadow in this video. What is the shadow personality? The first step toward understanding your shadow is to understand what it is. Jung felt that the human psyche was composed of three parts. 1. The ego is what we are consciously aware of when we think about ourselves. 2. The personal unconscious, all the information in someone's mind that is not readily available to consciously recall. 3. The collective unconscious, another form of the unconscious, but one that is common to all of us. Jung claimed that 12 separate typical human qualities and flaws emerged from our collective unconscious. He referred to these as archetypes. One of these 12 archetypes is the shadow self. For some, the shadow merely refers to unconscious aspects of their nature. Others view the shadow to be the aspect of ourselves that we dislike. So, how should the shadow be defined? Here are 3 frequent distinguishing features. 1. The shadow is the part of our personality that we have suppressed, often because it's too painful to acknowledge. 2. The shadow is the hidden part of our personality that is unconscious. 3. The shadow is associated with the qualities we have that we worry are less appealing to people. The shadow is our suppressed personality. The shadow is the aspect of yourself that you have been repressing since birth. Because it is so tough to accept, the shadow is frequently unnoticed. If you're having trouble understanding why you behave the way you do, it's conceivable that you've suppressed aspects of yourself that you're uncomfortable with. You may have been embarrassed by them, or concerned that they would make you appear weak or vulnerable. Perhaps you were terrified of losing control of your life if you acknowledge them. You've learned to reject aspects of yourself as you've grown in order to fit in with society. However, it is critical to understand that the more you repress your shadow, the more difficult it will be to access. The harder you attempt to ignore it, the larger it grows. As Jung once said, everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in a person's conscious life, the darker and denser it is. If an inferiority is recognized, it is always possible to correct it. However, if it is repressed and separated from consciousness, it is never corrected and is prone to bursting forth unexpectedly in a time of unawareness. In every way, it acts as an unintentional stumbling block, sabotaging our best intentions. The shadow is your unconscious mind. Some people wonder, is the shadow self the ego? However, the ego is the aware part of you that strives to tame the shadow. As a result, the shadow is the concealed aspect of your psyche. When we say something is unconscious, we mean that it exists outside of our awareness, but is very much there. As previously stated, Jung's theories hold that every one of us has a distinct unconscious that develops from our own unique experiences. We do, however, have a collective unconscious that is biologically inherited and programmed into us from birth. This is built on universal principles of what it means to be human. Both are contained within your subconscious mind. It's useful to think of the unconscious as a large repository of knowledge, belief systems, memories, and archetypes that exist deep within every human being. This implies that a shadow is a type of knowledge that we carry with us. We might think of the shadow as a library of information that we have never consciously accessed. However, once we begin to access it, the shadow begins to divulge its contents to us. Some of the information is unfavorable, while others are positive. But regardless of the content, the shadow always contains knowledge about ourselves that we were previously unaware of. The shadow is opposite of the light. When we think of the word shadow, we immediately think of the opposite of light. As a result, for many individuals, the shadow reflects the darkness within ourselves. In other words, the shadow represents the negative aspects of ourselves that we do not want to acknowledge. Therefore, our ego pushes them aside. It is nevertheless a source of better understanding and self-awareness, which fuels positive progress. For example, if you're having difficulties at work, it's possible that you're suppressing sentiments of rage or animosity toward someone else. If you're anxious, it's probably because you're repressing anxieties about something. And if you're having trouble getting along with others, it could be because you're afraid of rejection. These are just a few ways the shadow might appear in our life. The point is that the shadow isn't always bad. It's just a part of ourselves that we've chosen to deny. We can only accept our complete selves when we choose to look for the bad elements of ourselves. The eternal duality of man. This picture of a dual man, good and bad, light and dark, has existed since the beginning of humanity, and we're still seeing both sides of humanity. We see both the finest and worst sides of ourselves, no matter how hard we try to ignore the negative. Keep in mind that these two portions are not mutually exclusive. They coexist as if they were one. They are both the same thing. This idea has persisted in spiritual and psychological teachings throughout the ages. The concept of yin and yang in ancient Chinese philosophy emphasizes how two opposing and seemingly opposed elements are interrelated. They can only produce the complete if they work together. Both are interdependent and interconnected. Although Jung established the concept of the shadow self, he based on concepts about the unconscious from thinkers Friedrich Nietzsche and Sigmund Freud. As man strives to come to terms with the seemingly darker aspect of himself, themes of the shadow self appear throughout classic literature and the arts. The fictitious story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is an excellent illustration of this, and it is frequently used to demonstrate the concept of our shadow self. Dr. Jekyll represents our persona, how we see ourselves, whereas Mr. Hyde represents our repressed and disregarded shadow side. When Jekyll's conscious moral efforts fail, his instinctive inner self, Hyde, can emerge. At that time my virtue slept, my evil, kept awake by ambition, was alert and quick to seize the opportunity, and the thing projected was Edward Hyde. Why do we repress the shadow? It's not difficult to understand why we try so hard to avoid our shadow selves. Each of us is accustomed to putting on a socially acceptable mask. This is the facet of ourselves that we want others to see. We put on this mask in order to be liked and accepted by society. However, we all have instincts, wants, emotions, and urges that are deemed undesirable or detrimental. Sexual desires and lust are examples of these. A yearning for power and dominance. Anger, violence, or rage are examples of raw emotions. Envy, selfishness, racism, and greed are also unappealing emotions. Essentially, we deny within ourselves anything we consider to be wrong, bad, evil, inferior, or unsuitable. Instead of mysteriously disappearing, these aspects of ourselves merge to form our shadow self. This shadow self is the polar opposite of our persona, another archetype, which is the conscious personality that we want the rest of the world to perceive. We have a shadow self because we desire to fit in. We are concerned that addressing the undesirable aspects of ourselves would result in rejection and ostracization. So we hide them, we ignore them, we pretend they don't exist. Or worse still, we project them onto someone else. But none of these approaches really work. They can't deal with the core issue, because the problem isn't external, it's internal. The problem lies within us. Ways to spot your shadow self. So what exactly is shadow behavior? Simply described, it is when we react negatively to things in our lives, whether they are people, events, or situations. This activity is largely automatic, unconscious, and unintentional. Jung felt that our shadow frequently manifests in our dreams in many dark or demonic shapes. This could include snakes, rats, monsters, demons, and so forth. Basically anything that evokes wildness or gloom, but it also manifests itself in our daily lives, albeit in different ways for each of us. As a result, we'll all have distinct shadow behaviors. However, some are extremely prevalent. Here are 7 methods to recognize your shadow self. 1. Projection. The most typical method we deal with our shadow self is through projection, a Freudian defensive mechanism. It is possible to avoid facing your own faults by projecting negative attributes and difficulties onto other individuals. We are deeply concerned that we are not good enough, and we subconsciously transfer these concerns onto those around us. We regard individuals around us as deficient and problematic. This does not only occur on an individual level. Cults, political organizations, religions, and even entire nations engage in it. It has the potential to exacerbate long-standing societal ills, such as racism, homophobia, misogyny, and xenophobia. Finding a scapegoat for difficulties allows the blame to be shifted to a other who can be maligned. The goal remains constant: You pass the buck rather than accepting responsibility for any unpleasant feelings or attributes you may be experiencing. You project unwanted things about yourself onto someone else. A classic example of this would be the cheating partner who keeps accusing their spouse of having an affair. 2. Criticism and judgment of others. When we identify shortcomings in others, it's because we recognize them in ourselves. We are eager to point out others' flaws, but rarely accept responsibility for our own. We are condemning ourselves when we criticize others. That's because everything we dislike about someone else lives within us and has yet to be integrated. People may have said things like, they don't get along because they're so similar that they butt heads. The same logic is at work when we pass judgment on others. You might not be as different as you believe. 3. Victimhood. Victimhood is another way our shadow selves manifest. When we feel victimized, we often believe that there was nothing we could have done to prevent it. So instead of accepting responsibility for our role in creating the problem, we give up and blame someone else. We will even go so far as to invent complex illusions in which we believe we are the one who has been wronged. Victimhood can also be expressed through self-pity. We blame ourselves rather than others. We begin to feel sorry for ourselves and regard ourselves as victims. Either way, we are usually looking for sympathy and validation from others. 4. Superiority. Thinking you are better than other people is another example of how our shadow selves show up in our lives. It is typically based in childhood experiences in which we were not given enough attention or love. As children, we crave acceptance and approval from those around us. If we do not receive these goods, we may attempt to compensate by believing that we are superior to others. As a result, we become arrogant and judgmental. This, however, is only to disguise our own feelings of impotence, worthlessness, and vulnerability. When we have influence over someone else, we feel less vulnerable. Another example is a boss that is absolutely out of control at work. His outward displays of strength disguise his inner worries of feeling weak. 5. Feeling triggered. We've all had experiences where someone says something that causes an impulsive, unfavorable reaction. Their remark or words nettle or sting deep within. They appear to have struck a nerve. This is prevalent among parents and family members. They say something that reopens old wounds and causes pain. The end result? Anger, frustration, or defensiveness appear rapidly. They have, in fact, touched on something we have repressed as part of our shadow self. 6. Taking pleasure from pain. As strange as it may sound, there is a slight type of enjoyment in harming others and self-destruction in everyday life. When a friend appears to fail at something, you may secretly rejoice. At the very least, you won't be as concerned that they are better than you. You could choose to labor yourself to death as a workaholic only to prove yourself. Through various forms of BDSM, you may enjoy causing or suffering moderate pain in the bedroom. 7. Unhealthy relationships. Many of us reenact old unconscious behaviors in dysfunctional, unhealthy, or even toxic relationships. The majority of people are unaware that they have been rehearsing the same unconscious roles from childhood. These familiar roads become known to us, and they serve as the framework within which we engage with others. However, when these unconscious behaviors are detrimental, relationship conflict ensues. For example, if your mother had a habit of criticizing you, you may unknowingly replicate the same behavior toward your relationship or seek for a partner who does the same. When you're angry, you lash out. When you're hurt, you withdraw. And when you're rejected, you start to doubt yourself. Why do you need to accept your shadow side? Simply, rejecting the shadow is ineffective. As long as our shadow continues to silently pull our strings behind the scenes, the illusion between the ego and the real reality around us will be reinforced. This illusion can result in a false idealized self who believes lies such as, I am better than them, I deserve to be validated, and people who do not act like me are wrong. When we concentrate on denying our dark side, it does not go away. On the contrary, it often grows stronger. The shadow personifies everything that the subject refuses to acknowledge about himself, Carl Jung said. Instead, we try to live in a society where we simply aspire to be the best version of ourselves. However, this is not possible. The shadow, like the yang to the yin, exists as a distinguishing feature. There is no light without shadow, and vice versa. As a result, the disregarded shadow begins to fester. As previously discussed, it seeps out in unhealthy ways. We slip into dangerous patterns such as 1. Lying and cheating, 2. Self-loathing, 3. Self-sabotage, 4. Addiction, 5. Hypocrisy, 6. Depression, anxiety, and other mental health problems, 7. Obsessive behavior, 8. Emotional instability. But it's much worse because we are not even conscious of them. It's not a choice. We can't help it. And this is where the problem lies. If we refuse to acknowledge our shadow, we will never find freedom. As Connie Zweig puts it in her book, Meeting the Shadow, the hidden power of the dark side of human nature. In order to protect its own control and sovereignty, the ego instinctively puts up a great resistance to the confrontation with the shadow. When it catches a glimpse of the shadow, the ego most often reacts with an attempt to eliminate it. Our will is mobilized and we decide, I just won't be that way anymore. Then comes the final shattering shock, when we discover that, in part at least, this is impossible no matter how we try. The shadow represents energetically charged, autonomous patterns of feeling and behavior. Their energy cannot simply be stopped by an act of will. What is needed is rechanneling or transformation. It is our failure to identify and love our shadow that keeps us stuck. We can only control our shadow if we allow it to assume its rightful place as a part of our full self, rather than having it lash out at random. Integrating the hidden power of your dark side. Man becomes whole, integrated, calm, fertile, and happy when and only when the process of individuation is complete, when the conscious and the unconscious have learned to live at peace and to complement one another. Carl Jung, Man and His Symbols. The process of so-called individuation, according to Jung, is how we deal with our shadow selves. In essence, it is a fusion. You learn to recognize and embrace your shadow self before integrating it into your conscious brain. This gives the shadow a proper expression. Many individuals refer to this as shadow work. However, other terms for it include self-reflection, self-examination, self-knowledge, and even self-love. Whatever you want to name it, it's critical because without it, you'll never truly understand who you are and where you're heading. Shadow work is incredibly valuable since it allows you to acquire insight into your inner world by questioning and exploring yourself. It all comes down to scrutinizing your thoughts, feelings, and assumptions as objectively as possible. This will help you learn more about yourself. You'll gain a more honest understanding of your own strengths and flaws, likes and dislikes, aspirations and dreams, and concerns and anxieties. The following are some of the advantages of shadow work. 1. You become aware of your emotional patterns and tendencies rather than being a slave to them. 2. You learn to recognize your own needs and desires. 3. You can more easily tap into the intuitive inner voice and compass. 4. You grow spiritually by recognizing your connection with others, God, the universe. 5. You increase your ability to make clearer decisions. 6. You improve your overall health and well-being. 7. You build confidence and self-esteem. 8. You deepen your relationships. 9. You enhance your creativity. 10. You become wiser, more stable, and more mature. Continue to support this channel by pressing the subscribe button and then comment below to discuss the topic of the shadow so we can share knowledge, and share this video if you like it.